First, we'll get a handle on what this escalation trap really is. Then, we're going to zero in on the specific presidential threat that Pape says changed everything and see how that lit a fire under Iran's military. We'll also take a serious look at the counterargument, the idea that Iran was actually left in ruins. And finally, we'll get to Pape's bombshell conclusion that Iran is now a new global power and what that means for, well, for everybody. All right, first up, the escalation trap. What exactly is it, and why does Professor Pape think we're heading into an even more dangerous phase of it right now? Okay, so at its core, it's this vicious cycle of attack and counterattack that just becomes almost impossible to break free from. Pape's point is that this trap isn't just still active, it's getting tighter. And with U.S. forces so close to the action, he makes a pretty stark claim. The trap won't even start to loosen until those troops are physically moved out of the region. Pape argues that to really get what's happening, you have to see three things all at once. First, that trap is tightening. Second, because of that, the whole global balance of power is shifting right under our feet. And all of it got kicked into overdrive by one single unprecedented statement from a president that Pape believes will have consequences for decades. So let's focus on that third point, because really it's the trigger for everything else. Pape makes the case that no U.S. president in the entire history of the country has ever made a public threat quite like this one. Now, Pape's reading of this quote is, well, it's chilling. He argues this is way more than just political tough talk. He calls it a clear statement of genocidal intent. And why that specific phrase? Because under international law, things like the Geneva Accords, proving the intent to wipe out a population is the hardest thing to do. Pape argues this statement just flat out says it, making the threat totally unambiguous. And this was absolutely not an empty threat. The reality behind those words is terrifying. The U.S. has about 500 Minuteman missiles. In just 45 minutes, their guidance systems can be pointed at Iran, and 20 minutes after that, they could hit. The threat is backed up by an incredible and incredibly fast destructive power. To try and wrap your head around the power we're talking about, think about this. The bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, that was about 15 kilotons. A single warhead on a modern Minuteman missile is 300,000 kilotons. That's 20,000 times the power. The scale of destruction is it's almost impossible to imagine. So what happens when you're facing a threat of that size? Pape argues it gives you the strongest possible motivation to arm yourself to the teeth as fast as you possibly can. Or, as he put it, they immediately went back to reloading their guns. And their response has been absolutely furious. Pape's research shows that, far from being crippled, Iran is now churning out between 50 and 100 new missiles every single month. And it's not just for their own defense. They're also building and sending advanced drones to allies like Russia, weaving themselves into other conflicts around the globe. Okay, but can they keep this up? According to Pape, the answer is a hard yes. Just think of it as a checklist. Do they have the money? Yup, up to $100 billion a year, mostly from selling oil to China. Do they have safe places to build? You bet, in hardened underground facilities. And what about the raw materials? Check. They've got them from sources at home and abroad. The bottom line is resources are not a problem. But, not everybody sees it this way. In fact, there's a really strong counterargument out there that says this whole conflict didn't empower Iran at all. It was actually a massive defeat that left the country in pieces. So let's look at this other perspective, which was laid out by Noah Rothman in the National Review. He basically throws down a direct challenge to Pape's entire theory, asking if the conflict didn't, in fact, leave Iran as nothing more than a smoldering wreck. This opposing viewpoint paints a picture of just total devastation. The argument is that Iran's military command was shattered, its navy and air force practically wiped off the map, and its nuclear program was left in shambles. Proponents of this view say key industries were wrecked and their weapons stockpiles were basically empty. In this version of the story, Iran was beaten, period. So we have two completely opposite stories about the exact same events. How do we even begin to know which one is closer to the truth? Well, Professor Pape's response comes down to a really powerful idea. War has a way of showing you what's real. When he is presented with this smoldering wreck theory, Pape's answer is incredibly blunt. This is just not on planet Earth. His point is that we don't have to guess. We just have to look at how countries are actually behaving in the real world. Their actions tell the real story. And this is a perfect illustration of the new reality. For decades, it was the United States Navy that guaranteed safe passage for ships going through the Strait of Hormuz. Pape argues that's over. Today, the reality is that ships only get through when the Iranian military says so. The person at the gate has changed, and that is a massive shift in power.
And this isn't just about one shipping lane. Pape is saying this marks Iran's arrival as a new center of world power, putting it right up there with the United States, Russia, and China. This is a fundamental change to the world order, and it's happening right now.
And the ultimate symbol of this new power is a dangerously fast-tracked path to a nuclear weapon. Pape says Iran now has the maximum possible incentive to get one, and that we to be looking at nuclear tests within 6 months to a year. At that point, their capability will be undeniable.
So this new reality, an empowered, rearmed, and soon-to-be nuclear Iran, well, it creates huge, cascading consequences for the entire world, but especially for America's closest allies.
Pape argues this creates this massive ripple effect. For NATO, our allies start to question American leadership. For the Gulf states, it's a huge wake-up call that they can't just count on U.S. protection anymore, which forces them to make their own deals with Iran. And for Israel, its closest neighbor, the end of its monopoly on nuclear weapons changes the entire security game. For Israel, the situation is particularly intense. You have a nation of 7 million people in a region of 500 million. For decades, their security was built on having a clear military and technological edge. With a rising nuclear-capable Iran, that entire foundation is being challenged like never before. And this brings us right back to Pape's core idea, and it's worth hearing directly from him. War is often clarifying for the realities of power. In his view, the very conflict that was supposed to weaken Iran has instead shown everyone how strong it really is, while at the same time exposing the limits of American power. So we're left with this deeply troubling question. Pape's analysis suggests this isn't just some regional crisis. It's a preview of a new global reality. If the old ways of doing things, threats and deterrence, can now backfire this badly, actually making your enemy stronger, then how does any nation keep itself safe in the world that's coming?